Hello everyone, my name is Omar Ahmed and welcome back to the ABB Aerospace podcast. Today I have with me...
I'm Bob Wirick.
So Robert, you've had an extensive career in the aviation industry, spending over 20 years at American Airlines, and that before starting your own firm that you're part of today. So what first inspired you to get into aviation and specifically government affairs?
Well, thank you for that question, and thank you for being here today. So what inspired me is I was about 6 years old, 10 years old actually, and my Uncle Stanley flew an airplane from California to Michigan, and it was a Piper Cherokee, and he took me up for a ride, and I was hooked after that. I was just obsessed with reading everything about aviation that I could figure out, and into my teens, after I got a job, I started saving up for an ultra-light aircraft. And I saved up the money and went and I was telling my parents I was going to buy it. My mom vetoed it. As you can imagine, right? You know, you have some 14 or 15-year-old kid flying in an ultra-light aircraft wasn't kind of the thing. So from there, I came down to Texas. I'm originally from Michigan, and I got involved in aviation. One of the first jobs I had was with Braniff International in their security, I guess, securing their perimeter after they closed. From there, I worked at Boeing Aerospace and Defense, and upon graduating from the University of Texas at Austin, I had the opportunity to join American Airlines in the financial planning group. It was like the perfect blend. My interest in business, international policy, and aviation all came together. So that's how it started.
Cool.
Yeah.
What made you stay at American Airlines for so long?
Oh my goodness, it was just the opportunity to grow. There was never a dull moment. Every day was a little bit different. You know, we were able to learn things about the industry, and I felt like they continued to give me increasing levels of responsibility and assignments, and so it was just really stimulating to me. And of course, there's the people element. People that get into aviation, as you know, right? It's a small circle. We're passionate. Yeah. You smell that jet fuel, it gets in your blood, and next thing you know, you create these relationships and everything, and the people are second to none. You know, they're all about making air travel the safest, bar none. So.
And during your time at American Airlines, you took major leadership roles during your later half in regulatory international affairs. What were some of your most memorable projects?
You know, the ones that were maybe most stimulating, and there are several, but being part of a U.S. government delegation to go and negotiate open skies agreements. So in the early 1990s, there was a policy that was created, open skies, and essentially what it did is when the governments entered into these agreements that allowed carriers to enter markets without any kind of previous market distortions or arcane rules that really had governed the policies before. And so that was really exciting to be part of those framework agreements that allowed carriers not only to enter markets just based on economic opportunity, but to be able to cooperate with carriers on alliance agreements and everything to serve the market. So that was one, and another too is American Airlines over time had a few mergers. TWA was an acquisition way back when, Reno Air, and then U.S. Airways. I found myself doing all of the international integration efforts for that merger, and that really encompassed getting involved with about 60 different countries that both American and U.S. Airways was serving at the time, and making sure we got all the regulatory approvals, communicated with the governments. And so it just required a lot of coordination with legal and marketing groups and everything else to make that happen on sometimes tight deadlines.
And I know you played a role in negotiating the launch of American Airlines maintenance facility in São Paulo, Brazil. Can you share insights into that experience and some of the challenges you faced?
Oh, yeah.
Where is that facility at today? Because I don't think it's fully built yet, right?
Well, no, it actually is, and it was quietly built. So it's, I think, on the south side of the airport at São Paulo. Okay. And it was in a place that was previously going to be a terminal. But I felt fortunate to be given that opportunity to lead that effort, and it was a lot of work. We had to accomplish a few things. First and foremost was to pass two pieces of legislation that were required to make this deal work. The first being open skies ratification. So, we needed kind of free access and able to import in tools and parts and things like that. So it was important. And the second was to amend kind of Brazil's view on concessionaire agreements with quasi-government entities, which airports are. And that meant, being able to sign an agreement for American Airlines that was over and above 5 years. You had to have, we wanted to have 99 years, as in you would have in some of these types of agreements, and it was only 5 years, and so you wouldn't take that investment. But it was great. And the other thing is it culminated in the visit to the president of Brazil's office, and we had to brief him and get him to nod his head yes and agree to it. So it was a lot of fun.
And what were some of the challenges with that project? Just was it specifically in getting Brazil to kind of open up an American carrier coming in and building a facility at their airport? Yeah,
I mean, we had to continue to make these arguments that were, look, we fly overnight flight patterns into Brazil. The airplanes are on the ground from 7 a.m. until 10 p.m. And the only thing that American Airlines wanted to do was invest $100 million and create 200 good paying jobs. And the amount of regulation and red tape that you had to go through. And I always like to say that, for each action, there's an equal and opposite government program. Brazil was the epitome of that, trust me. So we had to get sign-offs from various different agencies, including a tax agency that thought, oh, American's going to be importing these parts. We're going to charge them taxes on these parts because they're going to go and remarket them and everything else. And we said, well, no, we're not in the business of selling parts. We're in the business of flying passengers, to and from Brazil in this case. And so we need a relief on that taxation because that's not our core business. Right. And so ultimately we were able to get that. But that was one of the reasons why we had to meet with the president of Brazil, because the equivalent of the IRS authority would not agree. So that was the biggest challenge.
How long did that whole negotiation take before you guys were authorized to begin construction?
That was 18 months.
Wow.
And it was pretty much me being in Brazil, if not every week, every other week, and walking the halls of Brasilia in their congressional buildings and meeting with the various different ministers, and just trying to make the business case. There were the local stakeholders too, in terms of the mayors and governors, and so 18 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that facility, is it only used for American Airlines, or are other carriers allowed to also lease and use space there?
It's exclusively American Airlines, and there's a reason for that. That was one that the government wanted, and then two, that was something that we felt very strongly about, because if you take on other customers, there are different requirements that we would have had to overcome. In this case, we have enough aircraft that we're going down there to where those bays are full all the time. Just doing light maintenance. It's not doing, say, the heavy C checks, for example.
But just during that downtime, instead of having to send it later to Tulsa, I think that's where American Airlines' major maintenance facility is. Instead of having to send it later to Tulsa for maintenance, you can save that time by doing that maintenance, some of the light maintenance while it's sitting on the ground for 10 hours.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the upside was it was a big cost savings for doing some of that light maintenance, but more importantly, if we had an aircraft that had some minor thing that would not allow it to fly and would disadvantage our passengers, we would have from about 7 a.m. until 10:30 p.m. to try to fix that so the flight was not interrupted. And that was a huge cost savings for the company. So it was a great opportunity and just a, I guess, testament to kind of perseverance and having a clear business plan and, having those government relationships. And that's the most important thing, the relationships.
And over the years, how have you seen the aviation industry evolve, especially in this area of government and regulatory affairs?
Yeah, I mean, aviation used to be back page stuff, the paperwork and just getting all this boring paperwork done. But really, it's front page all the time now. Everything from, sustainable aviation fuels, data protection of passengers, the safety things, and we've all been hearing about that recently in the news and some unfortunate incidents. So it's front page stuff, and really now people that are in government affairs or regulatory affairs are in the forefront in advising the C-suite leadership to make good and optimal decisions for the company.
What do you think the biggest challenges that airlines specifically face today from regulatory international business affairs perspective?
Well, I think, there are a few that we can talk about, but I think at least from the international standpoint, and I'll get back to domestic in a minute because there's something really important there, but it's the whole sustainable aviation fuel. So right now the EU is pushing very hard to have airlines adopt and use this. And the way that they're going to get compliance is by charging fees for, infractions, right? So I don't know that that's the right way, right? There needs to be incentives for investment first.
Yeah.
And that will kind of stimulate production, which there is a huge amount of demand for sustainable aviation fuel. And the other thing that the Europeans and others are pushing is this so-called what do you want to call it? Book and use or book and claim system. And essentially what that is that say you land in Amsterdam and there's no sustainable aviation fuel there, but there's a requirement that American or other carriers refuel with sustainable aviation fuel. You book it there and then it's claimed in some other destination or airport that has, and somebody else is able to use that fuel. That's all well and good, but we don't want to create a bunch of piles of paper where these orders aren't actually filled. But the cost of airlines in this case is driven up because sustainable aviation fuel is much higher.
Can you tell me a little bit about sustainable aviation fuel? It's a word that we're using a lot,
Yep.
But what is the big difference in this? Obviously it's making the journey more fuel efficient of an aircraft, it's burning less fuel. Is there anything special about the types of components that go into SAF?
Yeah, and I mean that could become from a really deep expertise. You could have a whole nother conversation on that, but it's all about the blending and some of the fuel stocks that are being used to create this fuel that allow for less carbon emissions, right? And certainly it goes hand in hand with the airplane technologies that have been put out there. American Airlines went through a fleet renewal process several years ago that was a lot more efficient aircraft that were being put in, and so this is just an enhancement to that. But one of the most important things I think that could lead to efficiency in lowering the carbon footprint is ATC modernization. And so that's been talked about a little bit because of A, the safety concern, and then B, some of the efficiency. So there have been a few unfortunate incidents that have happened this year, and that's just heartbreaking when you're in our industry. A loss of one life is just a horrible thing. But this new administration and certainly Secretary Duffy at the U.S. Department of Transportation has made modernization a priority. And that's important because we are literally using floppy disk and old kind of technology where you need to go and explore satellite-based things and something that SpaceX can provide, as well as making sure that there is the best and brightest air traffic controllers that are put in place.
Yes.
So that's a big priority, and we have to all pull together to support that.
Absolutely. So now I want to talk about your transition from American Airlines to what you're doing today. So you spent more than 2 decades at American Airlines. What motivated you to start your own company, and what is your focus now?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I am hooked on aviation, just still love it. And, I saw it as an opportunity to start my little company. It's called Wirick Strategic Solutions, in order to kind of pass along some of that knowledge to other airlines and indeed other industries too, to create revenue opportunities both on an international and domestic basis. So I take complexity and try to clarify that, right? And so there are a lot of smaller firms, even smaller airlines that don't have the budget or the need for a full-time equivalent person, but I can come in there and help them navigate some of these regulatory hurdles, thereby opening up new revenue opportunities. So that's been kind of my passion.
So how has your experience at American Airlines shaped the way you're kind of running your company and working with clients today?
I mean, it's pretty much everything. The experience that I was able to gain there, some of the complex problems, we talked about a few of them, but there are several other projects. The ability to get in and advise people at the highest levels of the company, not only on the policy, but what recommendations on what companies should do was really key to my development. So I've been there. I can provide those kind of insights to companies that are smaller or trying to get into this, and I think I can get there to the finish line a lot faster than others. So,
for those interested in aviation, to talk about, especially people that are like studying global business and policy, and they want to go into international business side of an airline, or fleet planning, international fleet planning, or regulatory government affairs, what advice do you give those people?
Well, there's a lot, but first and foremost, you need to be curious. It's intellectual curiosity about everything, not just airplanes and aviation, but you got to understand how the world works. So policy, look at cultures, communication, all of that rolled in to really help people get involved in aviation. So it's kind of finding alternative ways to solve problems, right? Because the one way that's there is not always the best way or the safest way, and so it's just a kind of a cult of constant improvement.
Finally, if you could go back to the start of your career, what would be something you would tell yourself that you would have done differently?
There's not much I would change. It's been a really exciting run. I think it's just, having that passion and energy and making sure you're building the relationships based on trust and integrity, because that's what this industry is all about. We have to, have that trust and integrity. So it's all about relationships and being, I think, curious. But, I don't think there's a thing I would change. It's just every day of the challenges that we went through, whether it was midnight calls with embassies and so forth. It was all about growing and learning, and I continue to do that. So
thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.